simply as a mode of art. In other words, as forms of thinking that affected the everyday life of regular citizens in the world, in East Asia, then Confucianism continued to be a very important feature in East Asia. Even at the time when there was a major attack on the Confucian tradition in 1919, still some of the intellectuals began to think creatively about the challenge of the West from Confucian roots. These scholars first in China, then since 1949 outside of mainland China, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in North America. So for 3 generations, some of these scholars continue to think about the Confucian tradition. Then in the 1980s, the tradition revived in the intellectual community, even though it had continued to be very important among the people as habits of the heart. From the 1980s until now, there's major revival of Confucianism. Now you can see it not only in Japan, in Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, but in the People's Republic of China. One of the most important intellectual developments in the People's Republic of China in the last 20 years, in addition to the continuous development of socialism and the introduction of Western ideas, especially liberalism, Confucianism became one of the most vibrant intellectual traditions. I'll give you one indication. In the last 10 or 15 years, more than 1,000 articles and books were published on Confucius alone. If you put it into context of the whole Confucian tradition, of the major figures, even the whole question about new Confucianism, revival of Confucianism, we're thinking about hundreds of major studies and theses. And according to one account, right now maybe a million youngsters by the age of 8 to 13 in Taiwan can memorize as many as the 4 books, at least 2 of the 4 books. And in China, more than 10 million youngsters from 8 to 13 are now studying and memorizing these texts. And if you look at the situation in China, for the first time, a person who began the education in primary school until graduation, never been interrupted. The first time these people, very well-educated people, graduated. And their sense of the tradition is much more positive than their predecessors. So we can see the revival of the tradition, not simply as an ideology, but as philosophy, as major disciplines in the humanities and in social sciences. With this context in mind, it's important also to know that the tradition is not only transtemporal, but it's also interdisciplinary and cross-cultural. What is this tradition? What is my understanding of the Confucian way? I want simply to characterize it as a comprehensive, integrated humanism. It is very different from the humanism that we are familiar with in the West, the so-called secular humanism, the humanism that defined the mentality of the Enlightenment from the 17th century until now. I want to be very emphatic. Enlightenment as an ideology has been the most powerful ideology in human history, because both socialism and capitalism grew out of Enlightenment mentality. All the major spiritual traditions put together, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, cannot compete with this incredibly powerful Enlightenment mentality in terms of its secular humanism. Confucianism as a humanism is much more comprehensive. It is not secular because the tradition underscores the importance of our understanding of heaven. If we do not understand heaven, we cannot be fully developed as a human. Therefore, Confucian humanism is not a form of anthropocentrism. It's not simply focused on the supremacy of the human. You have to go beyond being human, being you have to go beyond the anthropological world to be fully human. In this comprehensive humanistic vision, there are 4 dimensions. They are absolutely necessary for understanding Confucian project, the Confucian project. One dimension is the idea of the self, the body, the heart and mind, and the soul and spirit. How can we integrate ourselves as a fully embodied human being? How can we purify our heart and mind? How can we lift up our spirit? How can we find ultimate meaning in life? How can we study to develop our character, not simply to acquire skillful knowledge? How can we be wise, not simply knowledgeable, informative? All these major issues are connected with Confucian education. And the underlying thesis is the Confucian idea of self-cultivation. Chosen, learning to be human is a very complex process. Confucians refuse to use a reductionist model of understanding the person. It is not enough to think about a person as a rational animal, or as a political animal, or as a poor user, or as someone is endowed with a linguistic ability. Because every human being is an aesthetic being. In a sense, human beings are emotional beings, full with feelings. This is the book of poetry. Human beings are also social beings. We're connected with other human beings with an ever-extending network of relationships. This is the book of rights, R-I-T-E-S. Human beings are political beings. This is the book of documents. Human beings are historical beings. China is obsessed with history. Chinese are very much historically conscious. This is because of the Confucian emphasis on history. We are transmitters of cultures. In addition, human beings are metaphysical beings or philosophical beings because human beings search for meaning, search for purpose. So all these 5 dimensions, feeling, aesthetics, sociality, politics, history, and metaphysics are all important features of being human. So in order to cultivate ourselves to learn to be human, we need to be sensitive to aesthetics, politics, society, metaphysics, and history. In this sense, the second dimension of humanism is the community. But community has to be understood in a very broad sense. You may want to envision it in terms of a series of concentric circles. From self, family, to the community of society, to nation, to the world, and beyond. In fact, we have to go beyond our egoism to really enjoy the sense of nourishment in the family. We have to go beyond happiness to be an integral part of our community. We have to go beyond parochialism so we can become fully established citizens of our nation. We have to go beyond nationalism so we can have a sense of being a member of the global community. But we have to go beyond anthropocentrism so we can actually appreciate ourselves as human beings in connection with nature, with animals, with plants. In this sense, the idea of community is a very expanded notion. It's not simply a family. To consider Confucian ethics as family ethics, especially the family is very close. I have strong feelings for my family, but I don't have any feelings for others. You are confusing Confucian ethics with mafia ethics. That's not the right way of understanding. It has to go beyond. And it's a dynamic process of learning to be human. The third dimension is sustainable and harmonious relationship between between human species and nature. Nature is the proper home for the human. If we abuse nature, if we allow nature to deplete its natural resources, if we don't take care of the environment, we actually do damage to our person, not just to our environment. And finally, the fourth dimension is a responsive and fruitful mutuality between the human heart and mind and heaven. What is heaven in the Confucian tradition? Heaven is omnipresent. It's everywhere. Heaven is also omnipotent. It's also omniscient. It can sense everything. But heaven is not omnipotent. Heaven is not all-powerful. Bear in mind that the Confucian idea of heaven is all-present, all-feeling, not all-powerful. Because human effort is required. I'm reading a text of Han Dynasty, the 2nd and 3rd century BC, by this great Confucian thinker who says there are 3 roots for the human, 3 roots in the cosmos. One is heaven, one is earth, one is human. Heaven creates, heaven engenders. The whole cosmos is created by heaven. But earth nourishes. Earth continues to nourish the world. Human completes. In a sense, human beings form a trinity with heaven and earth. It is the responsibility of the human beings not only to continue the creativity of heaven and nourishing the power of earth. It is the human that will continue to complete the process of cosmic transformation. That's the purpose of being human. So human beings cannot be simply anthropological. In the dialogue among civilizations, we talk about the necessity of some common values that will help us to live peacefully, peaceful coexistence. What are some of these very basic values? The basic values can come from all major religious traditions. By the way, I want to underscore that Confucianism, like other major spiritual traditions, is also a major religion. To demonstrate it very simply, Houston Smith, a major scholar in the study of religion, talks about the world's religions. He identifies 7 major religions in the world. I already pointed out Hinduism, Buddhism in South Asia, Confucianism and Taoism in East Asia, Judaism, Christianity, and Christianity and Islam in the Middle East. These 7 are major spiritual traditions in the world. They're also the 7 major world religions. This is also true with Evan Sharma, who is an Indian scholar. He spoke on our religions, also identified as 7 major religious traditions. So I don't think there's any dispute that Confucianism, as one of the major spiritual traditions in the world, is a major religion. Some people say Confucianism is philosophy, is social ethics, is way of life. It's not a religion. Simply, this is to say Confucianism is not like Christianity. It's not like Judaism. It's not like Islam. But even though it is not monotheistic, it's not part of the Abrahamic traditions. But if Buddhism, if Hinduism, if Taoism are all considered as major religions, Confucianism is a major religion. Now, in the interreligious dialogue, Hans Kuhn and I agree, this is something for our discussion, that there's a basic principle, absolutely necessary for any dialogue to proceed. The principle, I want to state it, or we call it the golden rule. I want to state it in the negative. Do not do to others what you would not want others to do to you. This is the Confucian golden rule. Hans Kuhn, the Christian golden rule. Do to others what you would like others to do to you. He believes these 2 principles are identical. Either you state it in the negative or in the positive. These are golden rules. The golden rule is basic to any kind of dialogue. I agree that a golden rule is basic to any kind of dialogue, but there is a subtle difference between the golden rule stated in the positive or in the negative. I prefer the negative because it's a principle of reciprocity. It's a principle of considerateness. It's a principle that do not impose one's own will and ideology upon others. But there's also a second principle. The second principle is called the principle of humanity, which is very much rooted in Immanuel Kant's, the German philosopher's idea of treating every human being as an end in itself, rather than as a means to an end. And in the Confucian tradition, it's stated the following: in order to establish myself, I help others to establish themselves. In order to enlarge myself, to empower myself, I help others to enlarge and empower themselves. And this principle is a principle of humanity. These two principles are absolutely necessary for dialogue. Dialogue is not possible without tolerance. But tolerance is only a very limited condition. If you only have tolerance, sometimes you don't need to talk to anyone. You just agree to suffer the existence of someone else. So in addition to tolerance, you have to have a sense of recognition. Recognition of the existence of the other is not reducible. You have to believe that other will always exist, whether you like them or not. With the acceptance of the other, there's the possibility of the beginning of respect. You begin to respect the others for its own sake. You don't respect the others because the other may be useful to you. With respect, then there's the motivation for mutual reference. You want to use in the sense of non-utilitarian manner. You want to take advantage of the presence of the other as a reference, almost like a mirror for your own existential situation. Only with your willingness to engage the others as a reference will you be able to develop the practice of mutual learning. You learn from your dialogical partner, and of course your dialogical partner implicitly will also learn from you. So from tolerance to recognition to respect to mutual reference to mutual learning, it's a very long process. It's not very different from you're making a friend. You first only recognize the person's face. Only through face-to-face communication, you have some sense, you know the person. Unless the person is willing to be known, you'll never be able to penetrate the heart and mind of the person. After the two become friends, it will take many years to become close friends. Eventually, the Chinese expression of the best friend is someone who's not only after my heart, someone who really knows my heart and mind. Explicit. The dialogue is not to convert. If you want to convert, you want to missionize, if you want to use your influence to convert people to your faith, you're not engaged in dialogue. You're engaged in persuasion, sometimes through subtle persuasion. It's not to convert, not to persuade, not even to use the opportunity to present your position. Why Confucianism is way? So what I'm doing now is not dialogue. It's pronouncement. And there will be a dialogue when we get into the question. So you have to say the purpose is not to make a pronouncement, to make a statement, to present your argument. The purpose is to listen, like what you do, not what I'm doing. To listen, to develop one's understanding, to develop one's own self-reflexivity, and also to extend one's own horizon. So if I want to dialogue with a Buddhist, my purpose is not to convert a Buddhist to be a Confucian. My purpose is not to sell my idea as a Confucian. My purpose to listen to him or her, and through listening, I'll be able to extend my understanding of my own culture. I am able to enhance my self-reflexivity. In fact, I can attest to the fact that I am a beneficiary of dialogue. It is precisely because my dialogue with Christianity, with Islam, with Judaism, that my understanding of the Confucian tradition has been greatly enhanced. My appreciation of what I call Confucian religiosity, or the religious dimension of Confucianism, is the result of my continuous, when I say continuous, for the last 30 years of dialogue with scholars, friends, and practitioners of Christianity, of Judaism, and of Islam. So if that's the purpose of dialogue, the Enlightenment mentality, I talk about Enlightenment as the most powerful ideology in human history. Many great values of Enlightenment, such as liberty, rationality, human rights, due process of law, or dignity of the individual. These are great universal values. They need to be incorporated by all human beings, not just Westerners. Human rights issue is not American issue, is not European issue, is Chinese issue, is Indonesian issue, is Hindu issue. We need to cultivate human rights. We need to develop a sense of freedom. We need to cultivate due process of law. We need to develop rationality. We need to respect the dignity of the individual. And yet, all these values put together, not enough. Not enough to face up to the challenge of the human condition. In fact, Enlightenment has major blind spots. One of the great blind spots of the Enlightenment is inability to understand the importance of nature. Because there's aggressive, Faustian aggression against nature to expand the human capacity to control. Enlightenment mentality is anthropocentrism. Enlightenment mentality is too much shaped by instrumental rationality. The rationality to manipulate, to control, not the rationality to understand and to appreciate. Enlightenment mentality also very, very aggressive in terms of individualism. The idea of the economic man is not a very pleasant companion, not a good colleague, not a friend, a fierce competitor, and often motivated by self-interest and the maximization of profit in the marketplace. We all know the importance of market economy, democratic polity, and civil society. But we also want to establish a sustainable relationship with nature. Another blind spot of the Enlightenment is that Enlightenment thinkers fail to understand religion. Religion is a very important feature of human flourishing, even in the 21st century, or beyond. In this sense, what we need is not secular humanism, but a much more comprehensive, integrated humanism that will be able to take into consideration of the whole range of human experience. It is in this sense that we end with the 5 great core values in the Confucian tradition that are not simply Confucian values, they're also universal values. The first one is humanity. Ren, sometimes translated as benevolence, human-heartedness, or human self-understanding, or even the word charity and love, humanity. The second principle is righteousness, or justice, or rightness, the most appropriate way of doing things for oneself and for others. The third principle is civility. In the world today, we need to be free. We need to have responsibility. We also want our leaders to be decent, to be civil, not to be barbaric, not to be militant. The fourth basic value is wisdom. Wisdom is not knowledge alone. It's not information. Often in the world today, because the cyber world, we're overwhelmed by data. overwhelmed by information. We confuse data with information, information with knowledge. Now we're moving from an information society to a knowledge society. But often we confuse knowledge with wisdom. Wisdom is an embodied intelligence. That's the reason why age may be helpful. It doesn't mean if you age, you become wise. There are a lot of foolish old men. There are a lot of very, very unattractive people in the 80s, 70s, and 60s. However, the kind of wisdom, the wisdom of the elders, how the values are transmitted, how one learns to understand oneself, how one harmonizes one's relationship together, the wisdom is absolutely critical. It depends upon the art of listening, depends upon face-to-face communication. And the fifth basic value in the Confucian tradition is trust or fidelity. Society is not a society organized by contracts. Society comes into being because society is a fiduciary community, a community based upon trust. Often, in Asia in general, in Confucian society in particular, this trust in the intelligence and responsibility of the government, this I think often is wrong. It's important for the Confucians now to realize many governments are not trustworthy. Many leaders are corrupt. They should not gain our trust. In the classical Confucian formulation, trust is based upon performance. The mandate of heaven is always impermanent. If the ruler cannot rule, the ministers will remonstrate with the ruler. If the ruler refuses to listen, the ministers may leave, or the minister may organize opposition against him. If the ruler is recalcitrant in his wrongdoing, revolution is a Chinese idea of changing the mandate of heaven. Is not only permissible, it's imperative. I give you one example in the book of Mencius. Someone mentions why one Confucian scholar considered reaching side, that the ruler being executed as a positive thing. This is Mencius' answer. A ruler should act like a ruler, full responsibility for the well-being of the people. This guy had no respect for himself and no respect for the ministers. Really didn't take care of the well-being of the people. So people mobilized themselves and dispose him, eventually executed him. They didn't execute a ruler. They executed a lone person, because the person closed himself to all the other people. So the authority was gone, the influence was gone. So in this particular context, we understand that the whole idea of the Confucian trust is something that you have to earn. It's not something automatically given. I will end with the one observation. A very basic Confucian belief is that people who are more powerful, more influential, have more access to information, ideas, and goods, ought to feel more obligated for the well-being of the whole community. So an idea of the human rights can be derived from the people's demand for the proper behavior and responsibility of the leader. So Confucian training in a very specific way is leadership training. How the people who are endowed with the authority and influence will have to serve the people. I think the Christian idea of the servant leader, servant leadership, is very appropriate to this Confucian notion. In the modern context, a Confucian is a public intellectual. What does it mean by a public intellectual? Is a person who is politically concerned, socially engaged, and culturally sensitive. Such a person is not simply a person in the academic community. It's also a person in government, in mass media, in business, in religion, in all kinds of social movements, even in NGOs. So I circulated this paper for your criticism. And this paper is one I presented in Tokyo on March 24, a keynote speech at the 19th Congress of History of the International Association of History of Religions. It's one by far the largest international organizations on religion. More than 700 participants from abroad, 900 scholars from Japan. I want to simply note one idea that I developed there. The topic of that paper is religious leaders as public intellectuals. I was arguing that all major religious leaders, in Christianity, in Islam, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Confucianism and Taoism, will have to be bilingual, meaning they have to cultivate two kinds of intelligence or two kinds of competence. One, they have to be seasoned in the language of their own faith. A mullah has to know Islam. A Christian leader has to know the Bible and the theory and practice of Christianity. But in addition to that, each one of them has to learn a new language, perhaps, the language of global citizenship. Because what the human condition is confronted with, ecological degradation, nuclear annihilation, disintegration of all kinds of social organizations, violence, drug, conflict, all kinds of problems we face internationally, nationally, regionally, sub-regionally. These are issues that religious leaders, especially leaders that are very powerful in countries that subscribe to major religious traditions, they ought to be able to help the human community to face up to those kind of challenges. And therefore, not only they are great leaders within their religious communities, they should be leaders in advocating the importance of global citizenship. It's a highly idealized notion, but it is very, very much related to the Confucian project. One thing very special about the Confucian tradition is that Confucius decided in the 6th century BC not to create a spiritual sanctuary outside of the living world here and now. So there's nothing like the kingdom of God yet to come. There's nothing like the other shore in the Buddhist sense, the other shore in the Confucian tradition. The Confucian tradition functions within this world. So the Confucian tradition has only one language, only the language of global citizenship. There's no specific language to the Confucian tradition that is not linked to global citizenship. It's something that we may want to think about. That's one of the reasons I think some scholars do not believe Confucianism is a religion, because in the Abrahamic tradition, these religions are not shared. It's difficult to imagine a Christian Muslim, or a Muslim, or a Jewish Muslim, or an Islamic Jew. It's very difficult to do that. But in other religious traditions, it's not difficult to be able to subscribe to both Buddhism and Shintoism, or both shamanism and Buddhism, or Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism altogether, like three teachings in one, in Singapore, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, among many members of the Chinese community. Reischauer has made observation that in Japan, 70% of the Japanese are Shintoists. Maybe 75% of Japanese are Buddhists. When they are Shintoists and they are Buddhists, none of them turn their back on Confucian ethics. They are very proud to be able to combine all three. So it is a very fascinating issue for us to observe. That's one of the reasons why Confucianism can become an adjective. Confucian. You can be a Confucian Christian. You can be a Confucian Buddhist. You can be a Confucian Jew. In fact, we have a lot of discussion in Malaysia. Many people identify themselves as Confucian Muslims. So in this context, I think the tradition may have something to offer to global efforts.
Thank you, Professor Tu. You will be very surprised if I tell you here that in Java especially, there are quite many Muslims who at the same time also embrace Javanism, combined with Islamism and Javanism, and Catholicism with Javanism, and Christianity with Javanism. That's very flexible in Java. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have experienced this kind of seminar this evening because Professor Tu has given us not only spirituality but also enlightened all of us with very explicit, systematic, and comprehensive explanation of every element of this talk. Unfortunately, we have some people that, according to the committee, should be the participant of the seminar giving evaluation, comment, or specific criticism, response, and the like. From first, my colleagues, Benny Subianto, Pak Widakdo Soekarno, Pak Muri maksudnya ini. Oh, Pak Widakdo Soekarno. It's not Pak Muri Soekarno, Stephen. Okay, and then Mr. Shang Tong Ji, and then Ibu Melitan. So we'll be the best. I think I believe on the idea of a lady first. Bu Meli, please. Oh, you will be the last. Mas Meli, will you be the first? Yes. Will you comment and respond? Meli. Yang Indonesia.
Thank you. When I was contacted by Anas to comment on Professor Tu paper, I told him I'm not an expert on Confucianism. I never did any research on Confucianism, but yeah, I know a bit about Confucianism since I happen to do some research on the Chinese and in Southeast Asia. And a few days ago, I got this book. And the book, I'm really surprised when I start scanning this book. This is a compilation of a lot of, there's some papers and also a couple discussion in Singapore. And I'm fortunate because next to me is the gentleman from the Singaporean embassy. It's really difficult for me to start raising any comment or any question, but let me start like this. I was in page 246 when Professor Tu was asked by 246 when Professor Tu was asked by Dr. Tay Ang Soon in Singapore. It was in early 80s. Yeah, and your answer is what's the essence of Confucianism? And your answer is, sorry, I don't speak Chinese, look very Chinese. It's how well mean. I think good citizen, yeah. And I think it fits to Lee obsession at the time. Yeah. My question is, how Confucianism worked during the decline of China in the 19th century, during the Ming Dynasty, the Qing Dynasty. Yeah. So if we believe that Confucianism works well in the last maybe 20 centuries, what will happen during the late Qing period? I understand that the external factor is very much determined the decline of China when the West try to expand their power in Asia. And doesn't the Confucianism ethic work at that time? Yeah. And then I was really surprised why Singaporean was so obsessed with Confucianism. If I understand correctly, Lee Kuan Yew is an Anglophile person. When he came back from Cambridge in the 50s, if I understand correctly, he was quite anti-Chinese in the sense that he wants to change the Chinese community into a modern and Western type society. When I read his autobiography, I learned that he was so obsessed how to change the Chinaman, the stereotype of Chinaman, dirty, lazy, spit everywhere and so on. And his being an Anglophile is so he tried hard to change it. And then in the 60s he started learning Chinese. He didn't speak Chinese before, I think. When he went to Cambridge, he didn't speak any sentence. He speaks Hakka, it's his mother tongue, but he doesn't speak. He didn't speak Mandarin. And my question is what makes Singapore government at the time try to impose Confucianism in the civic life? We understand that Singapore is predominantly Chinese, but at the same time, Lee Kuan Yew is also promoting multiculturalism. And after listening to your lecture, you mentioned about the second religion, 2 from South Asia, 2 from East Asia, and 3 from the Semitic religion. And you mentioned about dialogue is not to confirm, and dialogue doesn't mean proselytization. But I get a very strong impression that the 3 Semitic religions they have a very strong proselytization drive, conversion drive, and it's also obvious that the East and South Asian religion have no proselytization drive. Could you explain why this different spirit of converting, of proselytizing between the East and South Asian religion compared with the Semitic ones? Thank you.
Okay, we'll do the second question, please. Maybe.
No, I think after.
Okay, I am Shan from Singapore Embassy. Since Pak Benny mentioned about Singapore, maybe I should make a couple of comments. Pak Benny, you asked why it was that Bapak Lee Kuan Yew chose to impose Confucianism in Singapore, especially among the Chinese community, when your impression, in fact, was that he was almost an Anglophile, having studied in England and never having learned Mandarin growing up. My response is that, first of all, he didn't impose Confucianism in Singapore. I think right from the beginning and consistently, even now, Singapore's position and his own position has been that multiculturalism is a very important and critical basis for Singaporean society and Singaporean politics. Confucianism is not imposed, it was introduced in the schools. It was promoted, but not as a religion, right? It was promoted as a set of values to which people could subscribe. And my own answer, this is my personal view, not representing the views of the Singapore Embassy, is that he found Confucianism very attractive because of the particular circumstances in which Singapore was in the 1960s when he first came back from England and found himself Prime Minister of this new country. In the 1960s, maybe it's a little difficult to imagine now, but Singapore was a very disorderly place. Unemployment was very, very high. our economy was stagnant, the British had just pulled out, and the society was in turmoil. Back then we only had 2 million people, and it was in disorder. And actually a lot of the Chinese-speaking Chinese community, which was about 70% of Singapore back then, were very heavily in sympathy with the communists. And so the challenge was, what is the alternative ideology that you can offer to the Chinese community other than communism? The communists promised equality, they promised justice, they promised equal rights for workers, they promised, a better future for the unemployed, the homeless, the poor, the people who didn't have any social rights, any representation. And so how can you draw these people away from communism and win them over to your side? Right? One of the answers, of course, not the only answer, one of the answers at the ideological level is to promote, like you say, Confucianism, in the sense that you stress things like hard work, you stress things like incorruptible government, you stress things like the value, like Professor Tu was saying, that the government is going to take care of the people, that it is the duty of the ruler to deliver a better life for the citizens, right? And you ground this in a holistic system of rights, of values, of philosophy, of ideology. And among the Chinese community, I can say, if you look at Singapore's history, it had a lot of resonance in the sense that, it is an old philosophy or religion that came from China. So it helped to deal with this political battle that was being fought against the communists within Singapore. So that is sort of a historical reason why why Confucianism is in Singapore. I wouldn't say, I would actually resist very, very strongly saying that Singapore is a Confucian state. We are not. We are a multicultural society. We have 15% Orang Melayu, who are all Muslim, and we have about 70% Orang India, who are Hindu. And they are by no means going to call themselves Confucians. So I would resist that very strongly. What I can say is that Singapore believes in certain aspects of the Confucian ethic, things that could be universal, like Professor Tu had pointed out, values such as hard work, thrift, a belief that what you put in today, you will get tomorrow. And within this temporal world, the government doesn't resort to calls that, well, if you do this, it will be for your own spiritual benefit. No, there's always a very material, temporal sort of cause and effect philosophy that is going on. The second thing that I'm going to say is that the Confucian ethic infuses our bureaucratic tradition. A lot of people, I think, since I've come to Indonesia, have asked me, why is it that Singapore has a strong bureaucracy? Why is it that it has a strong civil service? I wouldn't say that the reason is because of Confucianism, but what I can say is that the structure of our bureaucracy is based on Confucian values. It is based on the Confucian ideal of a scholar official, and entry into the bureaucracy has to be by competitive merit, measured through examinations. And this is a long Confucian tradition that we have adopted and found it relevant to Singapore. Whether it is relevant or not to other countries, it's not for us to say. But it has proved useful to Singapore. So those are the 2 points that I would make. The last actually is sort of a side point you might be interested to know that about Lee Kuan Yew's grandchildren, all of them have names that are taken from the Confucian sort of motto of 修身齐家治国平天下, meaning cultivate yourself, take care of your family, contribute to the country, and thereby achieve peace in the world. That is the sort of Confucian motto. And all his grandchildren actually have taken names using characters from this motto. So he is not Confucian. he would never say that he is a Confucian, but I think Singapore has consciously taken some values from Confucianism that it has found useful for itself. Thanks.
Yes, sir, please.
My name is Widikdo Sukarman. I'm a retired banker, and I happen to know some about Konghucu. Here it's called Konghucu. Master Kung. I feel honored and lucky because I'm invited here, so I can understand more about Confucianism, and also I could meet Honorable Professor Tu from Yangtze, Harvard, because there are two Yangtze in Cambridge. One is the famous institute, and one is the Chinese restaurant. Which is not too good there, close to Harvard Square. I think in Indonesia, Master Konghucu is considered as it's a learning about the code of conduct. And not too many people are conversed in it, because in older time, usually people or students are asked to study. Students are asked to study about that, but not necessarily that it's taught in the class. After maybe that is when we had no TV, we had no even radio, so students only read. So we read a lot about that, and we have our own rule of conduct. This is not necessarily different with filial piety and Islamic, as Pak Sobani said about Javanese Muslim Islamic religion, or Muslim Japanese, which is right. It's actually because the Japanese adapted so many religion and beliefs, and then we have a kind of like a sponge like this, with a sort of all of the teaching. Now, yesterday I met a young professor, which is Indonesian Chinese origin, and I asked him about whether he knows about Confucianism. He said no, I don't know. So I think Confucius is only known by older generation. Now we talk about Christian and Islam, we talk about neoliberalism, we talk about capitalism. So I think we are more thinking more. We have to think about in terms of economy. So I think if we can go back to read again and listen to your lecture, I think it's very enlightening for us. The problem is that in the era of the rise of neoliberalism, which has the belief that the only underlying factor in human relations is economics. So this is very useful if we can understand more about your rule of conduct here. Even the neoliberalism here forget that actually Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, think about capitalism, personal freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of work, but it's related to heaven. Tian. So what do you say? Tian and Heidi. Tian and Heidi. But people now forget about the other worldly aspect and think about this worldly aspect only. So I think it's time to find the new beliefs. Furthermore, as you said that in terms of Weberian, the modernism then brings secularism, will brings specialization. So people now, or students now, are taught about special things. So they're becoming more mechanics than thinker. As your article in Daedalus said that I agree that we have no bureaucrats, which is literati also. So in Chinese martial artists, Bun and Bu, you know Bun Bu Xian Chai? What is the Mandarin for that? Bun Bu? I think what's meaning is Bun Bu Xian Chai. I speak Hokkien. Okay. Yeah, the martial arts literature, yeah. And then, how about the process of learning? In Confucianism, I think we start from home. Then we have to teach our sons, daughters. But now I think we don't have time to do that. There are working parents, so the children are left in the daycare or even with the servants. So it's difficult to start from home. We have no time to teach. And then in school, again, the subject are mostly mechanical things. How to do it, how to do that without any wisdom, encouragement on the secondary. And I think that is one part of the problem we have now if we want to do that. The second thing, you talk about what do you call that? Meeting of mind, actually. But nowadays, I think you know about what happens, and you mentioned also about the terrorism, this conflict of nations, of religions, and here I think also we have in the process of democratization, whether it is in the ex-communist country or even Indonesia, we are in a process of democratization. This is rather messy actually, because people still wants to be different with other people. If you say in the negative way that do to others that people want to do to us, I think here I don't do bad things to me, but I can do bad things on you. So I think that this is also the situation which we have to do. The last thing is if we want to make Confucian to be the world, the humanist, the reform, I think we facing as I call label problem, because people think that it's Confucian. I don't agree because it's just Confucian. They don't agree not because of the content, but because of the label. I'm Islam, so I don't want it. Even when the is good. So we have to think about how to do it properly and how to make the universal things which can be accepted by others. Thank you very much.
And
I have been with them for more than 30 years until my retirement a couple of years ago. So this is the group that I've been working with. I'm a sociologist, and yesterday when I was invited to a seminar where Professor Tu Weiming was the main speaker, and it was mostly with philosophers, or people who are the department of Indonesia. I think there was a kind of focus on more of the ethics and, let's say, the system of ethics, Confucianism as a system of ethics. But here you have also, I think, explored Confucianism, the other dimension, I consider the other dimension, Confucianism as a belief system, or as you say, a spiritual tradition. And in that sense, it is a religion. And I mentioned to you yesterday that by making that statement very clearly, people here in Indonesia who are Confucianists and who have an organization called the Majelis Tinggi apa?
Agama Konghucu.
Oh yeah, Majelis Tinggi Agama Konghucu. It's the Supreme Council of Confucianists. I think you can translate it like that. They are very, very happy to hear from a very authoritative person like you that Confucianism is a religion. Now, like to focus a little bit first, on Confucianism as a system of ethics. I find it very, very interesting and also revealing that you emphasize that Confucianism is basically humanism. But then you said it's expanded humanism. Not a humanism that you got, let's say, in the Western world. So it's beyond that aspect of humanism. And in fact, you were also saying to be a Confucianist, it's also a process for learning to be human. So I find this, as I said, very revealing, because I think it also has to do with learning to be human, and that's a term, to become Zunze. That is not honorable person, a decent person. And that is self-development. Now, in that sense, I think the whole idea that you should develop yourself to become a Zunze, that means, to become a leader. So it's very, very much is leadership. Now, of course, in the whole world, we have a problem of leadership. And definitely also in our country, here in Indonesia, we have a terrible, terrible problem of leadership. But if you look at certain sayings and certain ideas in the Japanese tradition, there are many statements about leadership. One of them is Tukmuri Handayani and all this. And I'm not a Japanese, so I can't, mention it. But it's a very, very good. What's that again? If you're in front, then you should lead.
Ada di belakang tapi
Can you say that in English so
you are behind people but you are leading them. So you don't have to be in front of leading people.
Yeah, in other words, there are, automatic seluruhnya kan it is when you're in front, you have to in the middle and in the
Dengan sosok tulang rambut.
Gimana?
Dengan sosok.
Ya.
Guri aja ceki. Lagi mana? Sobari tahu itu kan? Wayang nanti Pak Sobari nose.
But then, unfortunately, I think they're just useful pronouncements, but it's not followed. It's not implemented. Now, of course, we have the same thing with the concept of the Zunze, an honorable person. Now, this kind of leadership and this kind of system of ethics, I think we can learn a lot, in order to really make the society and of course, as you said, this dialogue, that's where all kinds of religions participate in. At least the 7 religions that are major world religions that we mentioned. This kind of dialogue leads to a better world. And I think we are talking also about a new world order, coming towards a new world order. No, but this, of course, is still very much in the future. Now, one thing that has really cut off in my mind since yesterday is the other pronouncement that you also made about religions. All these major religions, or Taoism maybe, are very, very much male-oriented. But my question is, are the teachings male-oriented, or are the leaders male, and therefore they're women-oriented? This is what I mean. The leaders of many of these major religions, very few women are leaders. The leaders have so far always been men. So, you get this problem of the interpretation of the teachings of these religions, including Confucianism. Now, we know about the 5 relationships in Confucianism. It has always struck me that is a relation between a ruler and a minister, between the father and the son, not father and daughter, or mother and daughter, but father and son. That's why you have filial piety. Filial piety is the piety of the son to the father. And then you have brother and brother. Yes, you have the husband and wife. But definitely I think the wife is very much subordinate to the husband. And I think there is also the pronouncement that a woman, when she is a daughter, she is under the leadership of her father. When she marries, she is under the leadership of her husband. And when she is a mother, she should listen to her older son. So it's always still very, very patriarchal. Now, my question is, there is so much emphasis on humanism, but there's no room for women in this whole concept of humanism. Now, maybe this has something to do with the whole period, when this developed. But then what this means is, and I was really struck by what you said yesterday, that there are now 2 powerful movements. One is the ecological movement, and the other is feminism. What is going to happen with all these religions that are so male-oriented and male-dominated, with this very, very powerful movement of feminism? That's my main question, I really, from the beginning, with that kind of question. The second one, about the belief system. On the one hand, you said, because it's spiritual tradition, then, it is a religion. But on the other hand, you also said today, in fact, leaders of religion should master 2 languages. The language of their own religion, their own conviction, and then the global language. But you said Confucianism has 2 languages, because Confucianism does not speak about eternity. It speaks about the here and now. Now, how do you reconcile this, with the necessity to have 2 languages? Because you also said that's why there are people who do not consider Confucianism as a religion. Now, when you say there are Confucian Catholics and even Confucian Muslims, I think this has to do with the system of ethics that's underlying Confucianism. So it's acceptable because so many of these ethics are also universal. Now, so I have these 2 major questions that I would like to elaborate on more, if you please. Thank you.
Okay, last question, the last. Probably not the last. The last for the first round.
Professor Tu, my name is Anna. I want to ask about how far the religion, Chinese tradition and economic behavior. As you know, that's the part of the scholar. We believe that the successful business in the South Asia influenced by Confucius. Meanwhile, as you know that Weber himself argued that Confucius didn't create the drive toward change the lower Protestantism to catalyze the European transformation economy. What's your opinion about the Weber statement? And can you elaborate how far the Chinese tradition, especially Guanxi and Xinjiang, contributes with economic successful behavior, especially in your country, in Taiwan? And for me, I believe that if I want to wise man and good man, maybe Confucius encouraging this. But if I want to successful businessman, maybe there is what do you think about this? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your very thoughtful reflections and critical comments. I will try to respond, of course, only briefly of hopefully all the major issues raised. First of all, I simply want to know, in response to Sofari's idea about Japanese. And in fact, I was once served as the director of the Institute of Culture and Communication at the East-West Center when we initiated this dialogue among civilizations. And in that capacity, I always also initiated dialogues among the civilizations we mentioned and indigenous traditions. So we learn from Hawaiian spirituality. If we look at Hawaiian spirituality, it integrates not only with Christianity but also with other traditions. So if we look at the American Indian traditions, Maori traditions, Japanese Shinto traditions, and certainly in this case Japanese traditions, there's a tremendous indigenous wisdom in connection with many other traditions. I think one consequence of the ecological movement is that we all become more sensitized to the various kinds of indigenous traditions, how they can actually shape our life because of the deep roots, especially in relationship to our environment, meaning the earth. So I very much appreciate that observation. For the Professor Sudanto's fascinating questions, I simply want to mention that the history of the relationship between Confucianism and Chinese polity, Chinese society, Chinese economy, and Chinese culture is extremely complicated. For a while, Confucianism is considered as intertwined with the agricultural economy, society based upon family, and paternalistic, in a sense, paternalistic polity. So Confucianism is not compatible with industrialism, not compatible with democracy, not compatible with market economy, not compatible with modernization. Now I think facts prove that observation is too one-sided. Confucianism is certainly relevant to Singapore, and Singapore is not an agricultural society. Confucianism is also very widely discussed in many societies that families going through a major disintegration. No matter what kind of family you have, some of the basic values in the Confucian tradition are still relevant. Even if you have families organized by a single parent, by two parents of the same sex, these values of care, ethic of care, ethic of responsibility, of humanity are still relevant. And certainly, so-called Confucian societies such as South Korea, Taiwan, have become thoroughly democratized. They have all kinds of problems in the democratizing process, but democratized. And so to say Confucianism is not at all compatible with democracy needs to be revisited as well. Now, there's no question about the fact that Confucian tradition declined in the middle part of the Qing dynasty. And that's the reason why we now have this question, can Confucianism be revitalized and the entry into third epoch? So it's not only restricted to China or East Asia, it may be even relevant beyond. In America, like in Cambridge, we have, on the surface, a joke, but it's not. A group of people, they call themselves Boston Confucians. These Boston Confucians are basically Christian scholars. And they even joke about, the Charles River that divides Cambridge from Boston. They say Boston Confucianism are divided into two camps. South of the Boston, they consider Xunzi, in other words, rituals or civility, very important. North of the Charles River, that's where I was, where Harvard is, people put emphasis on Xunzi, on nations. So the importance of human nature is good. Anyway, I think eventually, I'm not going to be boasting, but eventually, in some sense, Confucian ethics will be a relevant issue for American scholars to debate. Right now, we rediscover great American thinkers such as Emerson, such as Whitehead, such as Thoreau, such as Whitman. We realize Emerson was deeply concerned about Hinduism and Confucianism. And one of my doctoral students, many years ago, finished her dissertation entitled Confucianism and Emerson. That has been published. So eventually, I think Whitehead, the other day we had a major discussion on the relationship of Whitehead process philosophy with the Confucian thinking. There's a lot of compatibility. So the other thing that's quite fascinating, you mentioned about the notion, talking about Li Guangyao's idea of the Chinaman that's dirty, that's lazy, and so forth. And if you look at the May 4th intellectuals, one of the most powerful critique of the Chinese mentality is Wu Xun, and not to mention Wu Shi. If you look at the list of Wu Xun's idea of Chinese characters, all the dirty words put together will give you a reflection. So this self-denunciation, from our point of view, self-criticism, denunciation, may turn out to be a very strong sense of self-confidence. And the Chinese self-reflection, always very critical of Chineseness. Very different from the Japanese discussion of Nihon Jinro, what is Japanese. If you talk about Japanese Nihon Jinro, normally say the Japanese have a deep sense with nature and aesthetic appreciation, all these positive values. But if you look at some of the Chinese scholars, even today, like Bo Yang, like Sun Longqi, like Li Ao, when they talk about Chinese characters, they always talk about the most negative thing, like foot binding, playing mahjong, smoking opium, and so forth. But I think the situation dramatically changed. So I think we need to have some sense of what that situation is. And I think I agree with you that it is difficult for the monotheistic traditions to enter into genuine dialogue in terms of mutual, the relationship between Jainism and Islam. But how about Christianity with Judaism and Islam with Christianity with Judaism? So these are some issues that need to be further explored, and I think they are fascinating issues. And one again, a PhD student of mine who's now teaching at the University of Tel Aviv, and her lifelong struggle, lifelong interest is trying to develop a dialogue between Judaism and Islam. At the University of Tel Aviv, it's painfully difficult. Her dissertation is on Confucian Judaic dialogue. And so she wants to put into practice the possibility of a Jewish-Islamic dialogue based upon the kind of Confucian Judaic dialogue. She may not be successful, but I think the struggle indicates maybe a new vision about the possibility of some kind of biological relationships. And I think I totally agree with the observation of Mr. Sang Ki and the description of what Li Guangyao was confronted with in the 60s and so forth. I totally agree. I simply want to add a couple of thoughts. One is the role of Guo King Sui, who was the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore, who was very much a devoted Christian, who actually became a major promoter and development of Singaporean economy, and also Singaporean culture. He's the one that Bird Park, Singapore Symphony Orchestra, and symphony cultural festivities and so forth. And he originally believed that there's a close link between ethics and religion. Therefore, he originally proposed the study of Bible knowledge, Islam, Hinduism, and of course Buddhist knowledge and comparative religion as a way of educating the young to be full citizens with ethics. Li Guangyao did raise the question about Confucian ethics. And Confucian ethics was actually added to the original program. And Confucian ethics then, because it's almost impossible for the Singaporean authority at the time to find the Confucian scholars that would be helpful. They approached Taiwan. The Confucian teaching in Taiwan is highly politicized to honor Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Yat-sen and others. And they try to, there's no way they can do anything about Confucian ethics by finding scholars from People's Republic of China because they're anti-Confucian. That's the reason I went to the United States and find some of the people, including myself, involved in that process. And also my sense of Li, and it's not right to think that he's Anglophile and therefore he used Confucian ethics simply to manipulate it. Some people say to create an environment so Li Xianlong can become the prime minister. And many people at the time say Goh Chok Tong, was going to warm the seat. But Goh Chok Tong served for how many years? 30 years or more? 40 years. It took a long time to warm the seat, right? 40 years. And Li Xianlong certainly earned the right to be the prime minister on his own. There's no question about his ability in the economic sphere and so forth. And also he's very, very fluent in Chinese. And I had the honor of hosting a very small discussion, about 15 or so, at my home when Li Xianlong, before he became the prime minister, visited Cambridge, Mass. And I was quite impressed. Maybe Li Guangyao did something great for training his son to be so rounded and very, very competent. But if you look at Li Guangyao, when I only met him once, so I have no authority on this at all. And he's very, very open. It was a long conversation, so it's not a courtesy call. He recalled, and he's frank, that he wanted to use Confucian ethics. He wanted to learn Chinese for political reasons, out of political necessity, otherwise he would not get the votes. However, he recalled why he began to engage himself in learning Chinese and Confucian ethics. He was very much indebted to his grandmother. He realized that his character, in some way, was very much formed by the instructions from his grandmother. Presumably, his grandmother was illiterate. So it's a fascinating question. I immediately resonated to that, because in my study, Confucian ethics transmitted from one generation to the other throughout Chinese history by the exemplary teaching of the mother, not by the literary teaching of the father. And in a very interesting case, one of the great thinkers of the Confucian tradition in the 17th century, his mother instructed him, you must learn from the two fatherless sons of our tradition. She was referring to Confucius because his father died when he was only 3 years old. And the famous mother of Mencius. Without Mencius' mother, this is a legend. Without the famous mother of Mencius, there's no Mencius as an educated person. And his mother was not only a loving, caring mother, but also a disciplinarian. And there's a beautiful statement that her mother was weaving. And and instructing his son, and the Meisha's very bright as a young man, and didn't take her instruction very seriously. She suddenly cut the weaving. You know, it took a long time to weave, suddenly cut. Meisha was astonished. His mother said, you will eventually be like a broken string, because unless you have a sense of sustainable learning, you'll never be able to make it. So that becomes a very, very important instruction note for all people in China. So I think partly in response to the question of the role of women, but I want to return to that issue as well. And I think a much more complicated, but in a sense interesting problem is the whole question about why the mother plays such an important role in the transmission of values. The two roles of women that fully recognized by the Confucians as absolutely critical. One, of course, the role of the mother. The other one was the role of the wife. There's a statement in Chinese classics. Qi, the wife, is understood as qi. Qi actually is equal. Wife is the equal of the husband. Therefore, you have this notion about the division of labor. Division of labor, right now, we may look at it differently. Maybe the wife should go out and earn money, and the husband can stay at home, take care of children. But either way, the division is important. It's a sense of responsibility. But there's no question about the fact that all pre-modern spiritual traditions, with the exception of Taoism, turn out to be male chauvinistic or male-oriented. You know how difficult it is for Catholicism to transform itself into a truly equal. How long would it take for a woman to become a priest, to become a bishop or cardinal, not to mention become a pope? That would take us a long, long time. It is also extremely difficult, as I understand it, in Judaism, in Islam, and also somewhat in Buddhism. There's also the belief that a woman will have to be transmigrated as a man before she can enter into the Nirvana. So that doctrine will have to be changed. Now, Confucianism, as all these traditions, turn out to be very male chauvinistic or male-oriented, because I think the major thinkers turn out to be all men. Now, if you look into the future, this is, because I'm interested in the modern transformation of Confucian humanism. I think, I don't know the other traditions, I'm focusing on the Confucian tradition. The future of Confucian tradition, in terms of transmission of values, continue to be in the hands of the mother. But more importantly, the future of Confucian texts, of Confucian hermeneutics translation, of Confucian scholarship, of Confucian idea of education, of the Confucian idea of the liberal arts education, were all in the hands of women. For the simple reason, in cultural China, People's Republic of China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and of course Chinese diaspora, overwhelming majority of the people in the humanities, in history, literature, philosophy, are women. Women professors and women students. Most of the men want to become engineers, scientists, business management, law. They are not people in humanities. And so eventually, the future of Confucianism, as a spiritual tradition, as an intellectual tradition, as a tradition of practice, will be in the hands of women. So how the tradition is able to respond creatively to the feminist critique is absolutely essential for the survival, not to mention the flourishing of the tradition. I think this is clear. I'm saying it in good faith, not simply as a strategy. I was invited to Korea. I gave a series of 4 presentations. One of the talks I wanted to give was a possible Confucian response to the feminist critique. And they arranged my lecture at Yihua University, as you know, by far the largest women's university in the world, and assigned 5 radical feminists to be my discussants. And there was a poster saying, this afternoon we're going to crucify Mr. Du. It was very, very educational response, because for the last maybe 20 years, I've been very deeply involved with this discussion with feminists. Many of the feminist positions I cannot accept. especially radical feminists. They're like Marxists. They're not going to deal with their enemies. Their enemies turn out to be men. So they refuse to have anything to do with men. And how you survive in society with that, how to continue with your race. They decided to adopt children and so forth. I cannot associate myself with radical feminism. But I think feminism as a humanistic tradition is something I totally subscribe to. And I don't mind being characterized as a feminist in that particular dimension. Now the big question then, I think, and then again, it's a difficult question, but I think it's a fascinating question. If indeed Confucianism has only one language, the language of global citizenship, there's no language of, say, a particular faith, unlike Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, and Hinduism. And how can it be qualified as a religion? My sense is this: a very important study of Confucian humanism by Herbert Figueret, a very sophisticated American philosopher. The title is Confucius, the Secular as Sacred. The secular as sacred. In other words, one special feature of Confucian tradition, which is comparable to all the indigenous traditions, I'm sure Jainism, that is refusal to make a clear distinction between the secular and the sacred. The secular and sacred distinction is very much of the monotheistic traditions, especially Christianity, based upon the Greek idea of the body and mind. They're very different. If it is mental, then it's not physical. If it is flesh, then it's not spirit. If it is sacred, then it's not prophetic. For all the major traditions, other traditions, this fusion of the two is taken for granted. In order to, for example, we have a Tai Chi master here. If you discipline your heart and mind, when you discipline your body, it's like purifying your heart and mind. You just cannot say, this is my body, and I have a mind which is not linked to my body. You just cannot say it. The body is not something we own. I don't own my body. I become my body. The body is an attainment, is an achievement. Because when we're young, we learn how to walk, how to talk, how to sit. We learn how to become our body, how allow our body to express ourselves. So how we transform the biological realities into aesthetic expressions of the self. That's how we learn to be human. So the three dimensions, or three disciplines, normally considered totally separate in the modern university disciplines, are totally fused in the Confucian tradition. That's probably true with all the major indigenous traditions. One is aesthetics. The Confucian ethics is based on feeling, not based on rules and regulations. For example, you go to a funeral, you missed out, you just failed to perform the ritual. It would be very embarrassing. But Confucius said that's okay. If you have a sense of mourning, you really become sad. If you manage to go to a funeral, you perform all the rituals proficiently, and you don't have any feeling of sadness, this is inappropriate. So feeling is much more important than rules and regulations. Therefore, when you become ethical, meaning you get the right emotions, right feelings, right way of interacting, responding to the external world. But ethics never completes itself in the area of human relationships. Ethics has to be extended to the domain of what now we call religion. Because in the Christian tradition, you have Kierkegaard's notion that aesthetics has something to do with the sensuality of the body, which is never ethical. Ethics has something to do with the rules and regulations governing your behavior. It's never religious. If you want to be religious, you have to have the leap of faith to enter into the religious realm. But in the Confucian tradition, ethics is rooted in feeling. So aesthetic feeling, if it is purified, if it is right, it's ethical. But ethics will have to extend it to religion. If it doesn't, if it cannot be extended to religion, it doesn't complete itself. That's the reason why the highest manifestation of Confucian self-realization is the fusion of humanity and heaven, Tianyun, and that sense of responsiveness is very important. Now, that's the case. What is the nature of Confucian religiosity if you consider it as a religion? It is not Max Weber. I think the last question mentioned about Max Weber. Max Weber is wrong. Why? Because Max Weber simply believed that the Confucian ethics is adjustment to the world. That's Max Weber's position. Protestant ethic is to transform the world from the transcending vision of God, whereas Confucian ethic is to accept the status quo. If you accept the status quo, meaning you're not doing changing. This is a total wrong reading of the Confucian project. You're in the world, but you're not of the world. You have an idea of what the world ought to be. You look at the world, you know it falls short of the ideal, you transform. I am never what I ought to be, but I struggle to become what I ought to be. And the struggle to become what I ought to be is not dependent upon some forces from the outside. It's through my self-effort. And my self-effort, in a way, is an authenticating act of how I become. So in that case, you have the tension within the world. So in this sense, I must say that the ultimate concern in the Confucian tradition is realizable in the everyday existence of the human. So it's a special kind of religiosity. That's the reason we consider it a religion. It doesn't mean it's a religion comparable to Christianity as a religion, or totally comparable to Buddhism as a religion, but it has a very distinctive style of being religious or being spiritual. So the idea of humanism in the Confucian tradition, as opposed to the idea of humanism in the modern West. I think in the modern West, humanism is not spiritualism, is not naturalism. You want to be human, you're not naturalistic, you're not spiritual. So I think the idea of the human in the Western, modern Western secular sense is denature and despirited. Whereas the Confucian idea of the human is both spiritual and natural. If you're not natural, you're not human. You have to be rooted in nature. If you're not spiritual, you're not human. That's the reason why being human is not anthropocentric. That's also the reason why I insist upon the idea of an anthropocosmic vision. And how are we going to link this to many other religious traditions? I've been discussing, sometimes debating with theologians, with other scholars as well. Maybe I just mention one more thing. For any tradition that is alive, that is transformative, that is developing, you have to have a communal critical self-consciousness of the people involved in understanding and developing the tradition. When I say communal critical, I mean this sense of what's going on is not simply my private goal. It has to be confirmed by people who share the same kind of spiritual tradition. So it has to be communal. But it has to be critical. Why? Because a communal assertion about something can be very close, or can be exclusivistic. So you have to be critical. And this self-consciousness, predicated on being both communal and critical, states that we always have the right to abandon some of the cherished traditions that are now totally outdated or irrelevant or even detrimental. Give you one example. I think it's easy to understand. In the Christian tradition, more than 1,000 years, people believe there's no salvation outside of the church. More than 1,000 years. The most sophisticated theologians all people in the street. Then with Martin Luther's change, you can be saved through faith. Even Vatican today cannot insist there's only salvation, even though they advocate there's only salvation through the church. But most of the Christians, most of the Catholics don't believe that's the case. Hans Kuhn argued very forcefully that you can be saved outside of the church. He even said you can be saved outside of Christianity. Now, Confucian idea of the three bonds, that is the authority of the ruler over the ministry, the authority of the father over the son, the authority of the husband over the wife. It's unmovable. It's detrimental to the development. It is not egalitarian, it's not democratic, it's not with the kind of objective equality. And in fact, these three ideas came from legalism, not in the Book of Mentions, not in the classical traditions. In the Han Dynasty, in the so-called Bai Pu Tong white tiger debate in the court, finally, the legalistic idea of control entered into the picture, and the ruler, together with the people who want to help the rule, to say, look, the society will have to be fixed in terms of these relationships. Now we look at it, we think historically it was conditional, was expediency, now we consider all. That's the reason why this notion we call sanso, you cited sanso. The woman as a daughter must follow the father, and married, follow the husband, and eventually follow the son. This is called the sanso. How There's a new conception of yin and yang. Yin, of course, sometimes is called a female principle, or yang, the male principle. This is actually by one of the feminists in Korea. I learned from her, I think it's marvelous. The yin-yang relationship is a relationship that needs to be defined continuously in a dynamic, transformative way. So the father is yang versus the son. When the father is in his 40s or in his 50s. The father then becomes yin. The father became 70 and 80. The son becomes 40 and 50. The son will have to take care of the father. So the son becomes yang, the father becomes yin. The mother is yang, the son is yin. If your boss turned out to be a woman, you are yin, your boss is yang. And the boss as a yang will have to transform that relationship. If you and your wife, now in most cases, allowance on a daily basis from the wife. So the wife is yang and the husband is yin. And he said, look, Professor Du is visiting us. The wife said, okay, I give you a little bit extra allowance. So I think if we have this notion, this is totally acceptable within Confucian framework. The last thing I want to say is that there's no dogma in the Confucian tradition. I want to, every notion, every idea is debatable. There's no dogma. For example, most people don't necessarily appreciate this. Confucius was not the founder of Confucianism. Even the word Confucianism itself in English is a misnomer. It cannot be retranslated into Chinese, Japanese, Korean. What is Huizi to be? It's ridiculous. Rujia, meaning the school or learning of scholars, the school and learning of literati, or the school or learning of Junzi, and so on. So I think maybe the point is sufficient to make. So in this connection, you can have a major transformation of the relationship. And I can, you may find examples. I can challenge you to find any idea or any statement in the Confucian tradition that is not subject to critical reflection. Confucius also is not the highest manifestation of Confucian philosophy, because Yao and Sun, the sage kings, turn out to be much more superior, even from Confucian point of view. So we have a very interesting situation. You cannot imagine Christianity without Christ. You cannot imagine Buddhism without Buddha. You cannot imagine Islam without Muhammad. You can still imagine the Confucian tradition without Confucius. It's very strange.
This is very incredible time for us here, and thank you, Professor Tu. I think because Professor Tu is going to visit Pak Nur, so we should stop the discussion here now. And okay, once again, thank you, Professor Tu.